welcome to the session from card sorters to AI, a narrative of technology and public opinion and survey research. My name is 𝗙𝗿𝗄𝗧 𝗠, and I'm so excited that you all decided to join us and the History Subcommittee as we navigate through this journey of data collection. This afternoon, we have four fantastic presenters. First presenter, Tom Smith. Tom Smith is a senior fellow at NORC and directs NORC's Center for the Study of Politics and Society. He is also co-founder of the International Social Survey Program, ISSP, former secretary of the ISSP, and currently co-chairing the ISSP Methodology Committee. Tom is a prolific writer, analyzing and publishing the results of his studies in peer-reviewed journals, and NORC published reports aimed at students, scholars, and policymakers. And this afternoon, Tom will be presenting Changing Technology in Survey Research from 1935 to 1975.
All right, good afternoon. Data collection mode. We're going to look at data collection mode, data entry, processing, analysis, and storage here. So first, data collection mode. Well, the mode back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, well in the 60s, was basically face-to-face interviewing using 𝗙𝗵𝗴. And here is an old questionnaire. So this might be called a grandpappy here, okay? This is a typical NORC questionnaire of the 1940s, very similar to Gallup. NORC's founder, Harry Field, worked with Gallup for 6 years, so it's not surprising that the questionnaires. Could you imagine all of our surveys fitting on just this today? Yeah, but they did. Now, there were a few technological advancements beyond just that paper and pencil. Telegraph surveys, okay? Now you'll see this is a big advancement, which meant that the questionnaire was telegraphed out to interviewers. And then they did the best they could to type up. Matter of fact, the instruction was, type this up if you can. If you can't, try and find someone to type this up for you. If not, do the swing it, you know, basically. And then the results were telegraphed back. These were done primarily with small samples, like 500, for the government, where they would take and say, Friday afternoon, they would say, we need you to do a survey, results on Monday, okay? And that was a telegraph survey. Now, in addition, you may even find it more surprising that there were wireless surveys back in the thing. And, okay, how many know what WWW stands for? Okay, World Wide Web, right? Well, but back then, WWW stood for the Worldwide Wireless, where you could send radiograms. Okay, telegrams, you have wires, you type out Morse code, send it over the wires, the person at the other end translate the Morse code into a typed out message, a telegram, okay? Not what the word telegram means today in terms of a internet platform or whatever. This is the right way to describe it. Well, a radiogram was sent out, Morse code, on shortwave radio from like London to New York or the other way around. And it was occasionally used for messages, but not like the telegraph survey in which a whole survey was sent out on that. But between communications between them was there. Okay, so that's the data collection side of it. So then we still have data entry, processing, analysis, and storage. And as you've already been introduced, it all starts and ends with the holograph card. There are 80 columns of data, so if you have a one-column field, you've got 80 pieces of data there, and you can have 13 values. Okay, you have 0 to 9, then there's 2 special punches, and the 13th value is there, it's blank. Okay, so you have a value that there was blank there for it. And you start off with the punch cards, which we just saw. Then you have your key punchers, okay? And this is Lucilla Davis from the Newark offices in the 1940s there. So she is the key punch operator. Then you get to the card sorter. And this is Shirley Cleese there. Now, the important thing is there, you see kind of this white things, and you kind of may be able to make out that there's bins there. That is the sorted punch cards there. And what she is looking at is the tabulations there that have come out. It tells you how many are in column 1, punch 2, and whatnot. You got the numbers there. And behind her, you see places where cards would either come from or be put back into after you were done reading them in the card reader. So what do you have when that? You've run them through, you've gotten some counts, and if you were just getting marginals and wanted nothing more than that, you would then go to what was known as the percentage clerk. And there at her desk is advanced machines, an adding machine, and a few other hand-operated machines where things were percentaged, or if you had to do some other kind of similar, very limited calculations there. If you needed a crosstab, so let's take the simplest cases. You want crosstabs by men and women on a yes-no question, okay? So you run through initially the sample by the punch cards, and we're going to keep this real simple, and we'll just say everyone said yes or no. Okay. Then you have to take and run them through on each one at a time through the gender card. So you get how many men and women. And then our friend, the percentage lady, comes back in and percentages it separately for the men and women. And just think about how many. Maybe you had 80 columns. If you had more than 80 columns, you had it on 2 different punch cards, which if you had to combine something from punch card 1 and punch card 2, you had to make a 3rd card in which they were joined together. Simple, right? Yeah. So what's the next step? Storage. There's the basic storage unit of all surveys in that period, which, of course, inside of them have what else? But the Hollerith cards. And I can tell you, these things will preserve cards for decades there. And I'll give you a little more on that story when I get to it a little later. Now, modernization, the 60s and 70s. Newark got its first computer in 1961, which it shared with 2 other university departments, okay. And that's the first thing, so computers. Now, the census actually was using computers a decade before us, but pretty much anyone that was in the census, this is when it's coming in the 60s. You also have the same period in the 60s, the advent of general analysis programs. Okay, this is 2 steps beyond the percentage lady, because if you could run your things through things in the 60s, you might have your own unique programming that you could calculate things by the computer. But it was only in the 60s that you get the generic kind of general things, SAS, SPSS, BM, DP. I don't think that last one exists anymore. The other 2 do survive, although they're not the state-of-the-art software anymore, not R and others. And then you have the storage is being changed to real magnetic tapes. 7-track tapes were introduced in 1952, 9-track tapes in 1964. The difference between those and the whole development in reel-to-reel tapes during this period is more density. They could hold more and more information per inch. And of course, they have had a lot of inches. We're talking about, I don't know what they are, about a foot across. I mean, the big ones, I think. Yeah, I get nods from the audience. People in my birth cohort here who know. Actually, I see some people younger than in my birth cohort who still knows. Yeah. Okay. So, so this is I mean, these are the breakthroughs: reel-to-reel tapes, generic analysis programs, and computers in the 60s. There's not much of a break so far in the data collection, though. You do have the switch beginning at the end of this decade and really promulgating in the 70s of telephone becoming the main mode rather than face-to-face. Now, the last thing that I'm going to bring is what I think are two interesting personal stories about the transition over time. So, in 1974, I started working in the fall of '73 at Newark. And my first 6 months, I worked in the library. And one of my main jobs at this time, SPSS, was being distributed by Newark, okay? Norm and I had relocated to the University of Chicago. And I sent out SPSS programs on boxes of punched cards. Okay, so here we have the new technology, software, analysis software being still sent out on the old technology of boxes of punched cards, which you would read through your card reader, upload on your computer, and you'd have SPSS there. Okay, the second example is the National Tragedy Study in September of 2001. This was a study we did in the immediate week after 9/11, okay? And we drew a lot of questions from previous Newark surveys, and particularly from the National Assassination Survey in November '63 after Kennedy assassination. We did a nationwide survey of the impact. And there were many good scales, psychological impact scales that they used that we wanted to use. And we had the questionnaires from that. So we knew the questions and we went and designed the survey. But we wanted to do more than just compare marginals. So we had to find the old data. It had at various points existed on reel-to-reel tapes in the interim, but none of them could be found anywhere, okay? So we went back, and after much searching, it took me 2 months to track them down, we found in our storage unit the 𝗁 cards, okay? And there were 4 boxes, 4 of the boxes of them, and a colleague of mine flew them from Chicago as bring on thing. I don't think she had to check whatever clothes she brought with her, but she brought the boxes of the 𝗁 cards on the plane with her because in New York City was the place we found a card reader that could read the old cards. And we were able to 100% bring back, because we had the marginals and whatnot, and we got 100% perfect recovery of that data. It just shows you, I give you these 2 examples, though, of how sometimes the old technology has to be used well past its expiration date. So these cards had been punched in 1963. They were now being used in 2001 to bring the data analysis that we were able to do comparing the 2 major American tragedies of quite different nature, the assassination of our president and the largest, which thank God today still is the largest terrorist attack that had ever occurred. And brought to you by 𝗁 cards. Thank you.
Our next presenter will be Melissa Herrmann. Melissa Herrmann is a survey researcher with more than 25 years of experience. She's worked with CNN, CBS News, Harvard, the Kaiser Family Foundation, ESPN, NFL, and Annenberg, and more, conducting political polling, public opinion studies, and extensive healthcare research. She takes a keen interest in analyzing horse race polls and studying the methodological impact of many research decisions. Today, Melissa will be presenting From Phones to Flexibility, Transforming Data Collection and Project Management in a Multi-Mode World.
So when I was asked to do this talk, I knew I was coming in between Tom and Mario, and I was doing the history of phone research, and I decided to juxtapose project management research with that and include, I decided to include the technology aspect as well, because I thought that sort of dovetailed with those two aspects. And as I've been sitting through this conference, thinking about AI, I think, you know, all of these tech issues that we've dealt with across this time, from basically the 60s to today, they're all issues we deal with when we were talking during this conference. Like, how do we deal with AI and introducing it? We thought about that with desktop computers and the internet and email and things like that. So I'll talk about it during this talk. Hold on. So picking up from where Tom left off, telephone coverage expanded, and people started experimenting with phone for public opinion polling. In the 50s, which backs up, I should mention, I've talked to so many colleagues and clients about the data. It's not perfect. I just sort of put the timeline. Tom's is so exact, and it's wonderful. I sort of put things into decades to go over the flavor of what was happening. It's not perfect because so much happens over all this time, but generally this is an overview. Gallup started testing phone interviews alongside in-person. The initial challenges included limited phone penetration, especially in, you know, rural and low income. And then I have the side-by-side with project direction, where, you know, we had long project timelines, things were manual, we had detailed planning required. So then we move on, where telephone ownership helped make surveys more representative. I won't read everything, I'll just kind of touch on it. So RDD techniques improved our sample quality. Phone surveys became more popular, faster, more cost-effective. CADIE systems emerged. On the project management side, the timelines became shorter. It became easier for us to do scheduling and tracking, more precise budgeting. On the tech side, we had desktop computers. So when I was thinking about that, we had computers, but people utilizing them in the workspace wasn't the same. You know, it was like, how would we use them? We were using them for like word processing. It wasn't what you'd expect. You know, things people use moving forward wasn't where we were going to go. So as I think about it, because this is how, looking into the 90s, we were talking about anecdotes and how we did things in the workspace. The 90s, telephone surveys became dominant. But as the decade went on, caller ID, answering machines began reducing our response rates. On the project management side, it was the introduction of email and survey management software, all this real-time data collection. But in practicality, I was talking to one of our clients, and we were talking about how, yes, that was all happening, but not at the pace you would have expected, right? We were still using computers in the beginning with, we would print out the questionnaires. We would print questionnaires, we would write on them, and then we would FedEx. We would FedEx that questionnaire. They would then write on them, send them back, FedEx, because we didn't have the technology. When email was introduced, and I started, that was like 96. Email was just really starting. We would write the comments. We would say like, oh, question one, like you would write that. Attachments weren't really a thing. When that happened, in there we had faxing too. We would fax. Our poor admin would fax these 45-page questionnaires with all these comments, and my handwriting is just so awful. I felt just terrible about that. But the attachments really changed things for us. And we say that now, we're like, you know, it's a given that things get attached and sent immediately, but that time frame of all that took so much planning. If it FedExed, like that was, besides these long, laborious phone calls. So even though we had the technology, paper were still dominant for a lot of that. So then the 2000s to 2010s had the rise of cell phones, number portability, declining landline use. Again, for those of you who were dealing with a lot of telephone research at the time, we had do not call lists, screening technologies, the rise of telemarketing, TCPA issues, cell phone sampling emerged. We had legal, ethical, cost issues. So researchers increasingly turned to online, mixed mode, panel research. On the project management side, we started using more project management software. We were automating our quality checks, streamlining the workflows. And with the tech, there was more DIY software survey platforms, data collection and reporting tools, starting the integration of AI, machine learning, chatbots, voice assistants. So a lot's happening, obviously. A lot's happening here and now. So again, we still use telephone, but it's now often combined with multimode. So multimode has become we don't have as many standalone, many of us don't have as many standalone phone surveys. It's often combined with online and mail for broader reach. There's IVR, for those of you who've been in a few sessions talking about survey bots and different ways of using telephone. There's a lot going on. Effective for certain demographics, surveys that need real-time monitoring. The challenges are the declining landline use, cell phone limitations, lower response rates. Obviously, with this whole conference, we're talking about the use of AI for survey design, data cleaning, pattern recognition. We have a lot of uses of things like the automation for reducing ops costs, lots of software usage for tracking our tasks, team collaboration. But then there are a lot of other things we're dealing with, a lot with security, IT, and mode effects, and dealing with response bias, panel fatigue, and a lot of data privacy issues. I'm not going to read all this, but ultimately this has to do mostly with data security, and I knew people were asking for the slides, so I sort of summarized some of what we're talking about, that project management basically has evolved significantly over time, shaped by technological advances, changes in the research methodology, and broader shifts in our organizational practices. So looking across the board, starting where, again, picking up from the beginning of where I started, we started with a lot of traditional single mode, face-to-face, telephone, mail surveys, and we shifted to web, ABS, this multi-mode with mobile surveys, SMS, telephone, in-person follow-ups. And why do we do that? There were a lot of drivers of this shift: declining response rates, cost savings, access to diverse populations, improving data quality. But with that, we've introduced a lot of challenges like mode effects, ensuring comparability, managing multiple modes. So when I was looking at it then versus now, right, there's a lot to do with before we were dealing with manual workflows, and now there's a lot of automation and integration. We had, and it's not perfect because we still do have a lot of sequential project management, but today we're much more agile and a lot of hybrid methods. Again, we still have some where there's paper-based data, but we have a lot of real-time digital dashboards and isolated tools versus cloud-based ecosystems. Like for us, we made a decision to have, at SSRS, one large project management system so that people could work interactively. But it's a huge undertaking to do that, to have people understand that you're working collaboratively across the company. We couldn't have done that without the tools in place. It's very hard to do when people are so siloed. So again, with the individual roles versus a cross-functional collaborative teams. So the last thing I was going to talk about, and is very recent history, that the remote hybrid workplace has had a major impact on project management because it's reshaped how we collaborate, communicate, and execute our projects. Again, just going across, I won't read all of this, but the main places that it's changed us has been our collaboration, team collaboration and communication, the tools, as I mentioned, and the access to talent. So just looking at it, there's this issue of, us, where we're based versus virtual meetings, and I think some people have been doing this on a longer timeline than others, but just how we work with one another, our workflow, and the challenges are just different. Someone asked before we did the talk, what do we, I'll just end here. Someone asked when we started the talk, what's changed? Like, how do we talk to people about the changes in the technology and how we have communicated with each other going forward? When I meet with the young people in our office, I think I'm still okay with that. Yeah, when I meet with the young people in our office, I often tell a story about when I first started at my current my current company. So back in '98, I started with a project where it was for IBM. So I should have probably said that, but it was IBM. And so IBM, they had this project, and we had 450 individual clients. And so this is '98, and every client had their own spec sheet. So again, we had computers. We could have done whatever, but at the time it was very paper-based. So we would fill out an individual spec sheet for each person. So every project would get its own spec sheet, and it was just the way it was done. So it was someone's job. You'd fill it out on paper, and then it would go into this manila folder, and then it was someone's job to walk 450 individual sheets around the company. And that was the process for for all the jobs. So you'd go, and each operational manager would sign off, and they would say, yep, this is the schedule, and this is the price, and that was it. This was my first week at my company. I'm like a kid. And so they tell me, this is your job. The person who's leaving teaches me the job. And so I said, I can't do that. This was me being like a young punk kid. And so I said, my handwriting's terrible. And B, I can't write anything 400 times. Like, there's just no way. And they were individual. So I heard of this program. It was Microsoft Excel. And so I said, how about this? I'm going to fill this thing out in Excel. I'm going to put the things on paper, on this thing, and I will email it. Again, this was like a new thing. I'm going to attach it, and I will email it to each person. When then they email it back, I'll email it to the next person. And she said, you're going to work yourself out of a job. And this woman who walks around with the manila folders, she's going to lose her job. And I said, well, I don't want this job. I don't want this job. I'm willing to take a risk on my job. And I will advocate to get this woman a different job. So first I advocated for that woman to get a job in the copy center, which she did. And I did my thing, and I made it, and I got a reputation as being like this young punk. And everybody was fine with doing this stuff. But I tell the story to the new people because I say, my story sounds ridiculous, right? Like, it sounds silly to say, why would you have someone walk around the building? We had email, we had Excel, and we did the thing. I want you to come up with your manila folder story. I want you to walk in my office, use these tools, and come to me and say something that we're going to look back on in 3 months, 6 months, or a year, and we're going to be like, oh my God, wasn't that so dumb? Like, tell me the tool that you're going to come in, and we're going to both say, there's the manila folder story, right? And then we're going to have a failure with that's the one. So, because of course my story, you're all sitting here saying, yeah, like, we don't have the lady walking around with the manila. She probably hates me, but whatever. But anyway, there's my talk.
Our next presenter is 𝗪𝗂𝗀𝗪. He is a research director of 𝗪𝗂𝗪 Research, a consulting company located in London, focusing on market UX and survey research. Mario has been passionate about the intersection of technology and survey data collection since the beginning of his career as a student of sociology at the University of Trento, Italy. Today, Mario will be presenting development of online and mobile data collection, wearable apps and sensors, plus AI survey information collection.
It's very exciting to be here to talk about the last step, where are we now in data collection. And we can start with some timelines. So we start with the mid-80s, telepanel. I don't know if anybody heard of it. I have some images of that. Then we went into electronic mail surveys. Then 1990s, the first web survey started. Then we had the first non-probability internet panels. And then after a few years, first probability-based internet panel. And then in late 2000 was really mobile surveys where respondents were doing a survey on mobile. Even if we didn't want to, they did it anyway. And then mid-2010 is probably when the first sensors, wearables came out, and the first studies were using those to collect data. And then mid-2020 is really I created this acronym. I don't know if it's going to stick, but I tried. AI-assisted survey information collection. Instead of CASIC, I say AASIC. Okay, so sounds cool to me, but we'll see. History will tell. Precursors of internet panels. This is the British video text. There were these boxes sent to 500 households in the UK. And they were doing mostly like market research, and you could, see the question, then you were punching the numbers, and answer was really like a panel at the time. They didn't call it a panel, but it was really precursor of that technology, which eventually was really wrote up in a more like survey way, survey methodology way, where William Saris, who sent me these two nice pictures, as you can see, the one on the left with his co-author of this paper, which I don't have props. I can show you my British Library card, because I was able to access this very difficult to find paper, because it's published in an Esomer journal, which is not published anymore, but the British Library have it, and it was pristine. I think nobody opened that. So I was able to take some pictures, because you cannot photocopy anything. When you go in almost naked. They say no pen, no highlighter, transparent bag. That's it. You cannot bring anything else, in the library. They're afraid they're going to ruin all the books and journals. EMS, I don't know how familiar we are. This is not email service. It's a different story. This is a survey which is delivered via email. Then you do it on your own computer, and then you send it back. So it can be, sometimes they were attaching a software, sometimes it was a PDF, and many times it was like a Word document, or even like embedded into the email. And this is a really nice paper. I love the title, from AT&T, not shocking. Will they say, they were very excited. This author, Lorraine, I think, I would like to talk to her. I mean, she's so excited. She says, it requires no complex technology, just some common sense extension to ordinary use of electronic mail. So why are we worried about? Just do this study. But I was trying to find an example. I don't find them anymore, but luckily Don Dillman in his book has an example of EMS, which was basically a survey written in text where you had to type an X in those boxes. Okay, that's problem is that who's going to process that? I don't know. I don't want to know. Some poor soul had to type up all this stuff, but that's the EMS. Sometimes there was like a Word document, same story. You had to eventually, somebody had to convert that into the data set. This is one of the most famous examples of the biggest non-probability online survey done ever, probably at least in 2000, by the National Geographic. They were very excited because they said they got, so many interviews, like 8,012 participants from around the world. Amazing. They actually published a paper in Social Science Computer Review. I was able to get the journal and scan it because I thought it was it's a seminal moment in web surveys where it was super excited. At the time, in 2000, there were 16 web survey software platforms that I'm aware of. This is a Research Magazine, is a magazine which is still around in the UK, and they were reviewing those, and there were some names that are still around. 𝗙𝗪𝗻, for example, they was there already in 2000, and was the first, one of the first platforms. Blaze, obviously, is still around. So this is the technology at the time to do kind of web surveys. And then Mick Cooper in 2008 put this nice chart to make you understand that actually the survey was interactive. There was exchange of data online, and you had the user on one side. It's interesting, he said the user, not the respondent. That's a question for Mick if he's in the room. But I think the important piece is what Dillman already said in 2000 to understand the difference between a paper questionnaire and a web questionnaire, where in a paper questionnaire, everybody sees the question exactly the same way. So you as a designer or a questionnaire designer, you print the questionnaire and the respondent sees it exactly the same. This is not the case when it's online. you can sit in a different way. There's different screen sizes. And in 2000, it didn't say anything about mobile surveys, but they were coming, and they completely destroyed even more, the way that people were looking at questions. I think about the grids. Initially, they were looking so terrible that everybody was breaking off at that point. Then we have the rise of non-probability online panels, where the recruitment was done in every possible creative way you can get, under the sun. So just get people in the panel, and that's, I don't know, they were using all kinds of technologies like banner ads or search engine advertisement or other things to build these online panels. I like this book, which is probably one of the few books about non-probability online panels, which is called The Anonymous Elect. Why anonymous? Because you don't know who this person is, but the panel does. Elect, because this is a chosen group. They are self-selected. These people, they want to do surveys. They want to really tell you their opinion. And so this title is very telling. I love the title. It's actually an interesting book. It came out, I don't remember when, probably 2006 or something. The innovation, let's say, from a technological point of view for non-probability online panels was this idea of the routers. I don't know if you're familiar, but the idea is that, especially in market research, that most surveys are not gen pop. So you need to look for a specific population. So the problem is that you need to do a lot of screening questions. So you say, are you the primary grocery shopper? No. And then what do you do with this responder? Do you throw them away? But they're already there, they want to do a survey. So you send them to another screener. They ask you, do you smoke? Oh, no, okay. Then they send you to another screener and they say, I know, which kind of toothpaste do you buy? Okay, then you qualify. So this is a very basic idea. Now they're super sophisticated, the survey routers, where the idea of sampling basically doesn't matter anymore. It's really, the router is really a way to optimize efficiency. So I want to use as less responses as possible to maximize how many people do my study. And the evolution of that is called programmatic sampling. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but that's the new evolution where everything is going through an application program interface. There are also cost per click and everything that is being computed on the back end. And by the way, you will never know those numbers. And this is another massive black box, including the survey router. It's another black box that is totally undocumented, at least to you as a client. Going back to probability online panels, I started working at Knowledge Networks, and at the time we still have some web TVs. I couldn't bring one because it's a bit big, but you can buy them on I think on eBay. This is a picture I got from eBay. The web TV was a brilliant idea from Norman Nye, where you give everybody a box that you plug to your TV, and there's a wireless keyboard. And so as long as you have a TV, the box is a modem, so you will dial in, you will download in the questionnaire, and you will doing just a regular web survey. And so that really lowered the bar for everybody, because the TV, everybody had a TV in the US, so there was not a problem. And then Knowledge Network was actually paying the subscription to the web TV box, which is was a Microsoft product. And you can also use it just to go online, without buying a computer, which was very expensive. So how these surveys look like? Luckily, there's a book that is still out there, online, and is free open access with some images which they took from. Here you have on the left Doug Rivers actually inviting you to do a survey. And on the right, you see another survey where the picture is black and white, but obviously there were colors, where the technology was able actually to even have images, and even videos. They were downloading them at night, and so it took a while, but you could do that. That's really how Knowledge Network started. And in the Netherlands, there's something called SimPC, which is Simple PC, and this company is still around. They sell PCs for people who have low literacy, and they're very easy to use. And amazingly enough, this company is still around. Mobile surveys completely changed the way we are doing surveys, because we number one, we lose control on the respondents. So they are not at home anymore, they are out and about. And this is a nice paper, I don't have time to go through, it's a book chapter, to give you this idea where you can actually trigger surveys in a different way. This idea of like an email invitation and you do the survey is the past. Now you can trigger them based on context or on other things that can happen, and you have control on that. I'm going very fast. I have more slides than I can show you, but I'll do my best. And then we have the latest way of collecting data, which is with wearables, so wearable apps and sensors, where the general idea is that you want to collect human behavioral data and social interaction at scale. And also, you don't want to ask people, because asking people is very hard for some topics. Like, if you ask people, how many steps did you walk today? Who knows that, So just have your smartwatch to do that. And so that's the promise of this passive and unobtrusive data collection that Florian has written. Where is Florian? Yeah, he's written a book about, so talk to him. Look how many sensors there are I stole this slide from Florian, obviously, just in a phone. And look how the number of sensors on the Galaxy phones, which is one of the most sold phone for Android, went from 6 sensors in 2010 to 17 in 2022, and I don't know the latest number in 2025. And then we have the latest, AI-assisted survey information collection that is being used at each stage of the survey research process. Here there are some examples for every stage of the data collection. Plus, the latest is don't even bother to collect data, just generate a synthetic data set. That's the extreme of AI-assisted survey data collection. I want to close by looking at a bit on the total survey error, because the question is, well, we have all this innovation in technology. Are we getting better data or not? I mean, is the quality better? Is it just because it's cool we are doing, or is it because we are saving money? Or, well, maybe, hopefully, yes, but is the quality going up? So let's look at coverage error. Those are all Pew data. So internet penetration, I think we are doing well. In some countries, not really, still now, but that probably it's okay. Then we have, smartphones. Yeah, no, wouldn't worry too much. But with wearables, it's a different story. The penetration there is not really there. This is a study done in 2019. Couldn't find anything newer, but probably the numbers are not as high as the other one. Let's look at no response, potential no response error. This is an amazing meta-analysis where those are randomized experiments. And the story is that when you go to web surveys, on average, your response rate is going to go down. There's nothing you can do, all right? On average, by 12 percentage points in comparison to other modes, which can be mail, telephone, and other. So we know that the correlation is not 100%, but we need to remember that switching to web maybe is better for you as a researcher, but the response rate on average are going down. And those are randomized experiments. So half of the people got it on the phone, and half of the people got it online. How about sensitive topics? Comparing paper with online surveys, actually, see, I put thumbs up, is great. We got 1.20 times higher report of sensitive behaviors. And we know from the literature that when the behavior is sensitive, the more the better. So every time somebody publishes a paper and they say this is better, it's generally more, and so everybody is excited. So this is an increase in data quality. This author, it's an interesting paper to read. There's some evidence, but they're not really sure. They speculate that respondents, they feel that the online questionnaire is more private than a paper and pencil questionnaire. We can discuss that if you want. But we have a negative measurement effect, which is when you start using wearables, apps, and sensors, there's a massive variation. Type of device, for example. So my story is that I used to run with a few colleagues, 2.5 kilometers, and we were all starting at the same time, running in London next to the river, to a canal, so it's a narrow path. Everybody was running together, and everybody had a different device. And when we were coming back, everybody had a different number, and we were always doing the same thing. And so I'm talking about major differences, like, not like 1 meter. I'm talking about, 50, 100 meters, which is a lot. Then we have users, for example, they forget to charge the device, so you get 0 data, okay? And then when you get the data, and if you are brave enough, They are very messy, by the way. So they're not easy to analyze. You need to do a lot of processing. You don't know exactly what's going on. You need to reverse engineer. So to close, I think there are some common key concepts and trends. One is these are all self-administered modes. So we move from interviewer-administered mode to self-administered in different ways. We are also going into more passive data collection, so wearables and other things. We have more survey triggering options. For example, the smartphone, like these surveys are called geo surveys, geolocation. So you enter an area, geofencing is called, then the survey pops up. That's an example of survey mechanism, which before was impossible to do. We have way more variability in visual appearance because now the devices are so different. So from a visual point of view, Wiedemann was right already in 2000 and even more so. There's a variability, I just measured that just mentioned that before. And then the respondents are actually all over. They are mobile. They're not at home, stuck to a landline phone. So the environment, depending on the topic of the survey, can completely change the survey you do, including the classic example of doing surveys of students about drinking. And if you do it on a Friday night, you get one number. If you do it on a Monday morning, you get a different number, and all the other stories. So that's something to keep in mind. I have endless references, but I leave you with this presentation. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Mandy Shah. Mandy is a research leader and 5-time certified project management expert with 25 years of professional experience at RTI, NORC, and an academic survey lab, and as an entrepreneur. For more information about Mandy and her work and publications, you can visit mandysha.com. Mandy will be presenting today from interviewer to web probing to unmoderated testing, questionnaire pre-testing.
What is pre-testing? Pre-testing, simply put, is the process to evaluate the questionnaire before it's fielded. And why is it important? Because we don't want respondents to have to deal with problems. We want to try to fix them, ideally, before the respondents see the questions. And pre-testing, in fact, predates 𝗙𝗄𝗄. Today, we are attending the 80th anniversary conference of 𝗙𝗄𝗄, but pre-testing actually started in the 1930s. I'm going to start with data collection-based approaches. The most popular approaches are two: cognitive interviewing and usability testing. And with the proliferation of web surveys, my colleagues at GAZES now call web probing as online cognitive interviewing. I'm going to show you what it looks like. Essentially, you can see probes being provided to the respondents and with a text box that people can answer. So web probing would be without the presence of an interviewer. And usability testing, what's different? Cognitive interviewing focuses on the thought process. How did you decide to say 6, for example? Usability testing is about how the survey respondents interact with the instrument. And I put a big plus sign there because, again, with the proliferation of web surveys, most of these days, we are really doing a combined cognitive interviewing and usability testing out of necessity. Does anyone know what these are? I spent a good part of perhaps at least a decade using these equipments. Anyone here remember Y2K? Anyone? Okay. That was a year I started at NORC, my second full-time job. That was my job. I used a Walkman and I inserted a cassette tape and I recorded my pre-testing respondents. And I had a lot of these tapes. Very quickly, NORC migrated to voice over IP phones. What's the problem? That's digital. And my cassette tapes, they were analog. So how do I record them? Let's say if it's a telephone survey, I want to mirror the condition. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm gonna call you. Well, it's always face-to-face, but you're gonna sit there in a different room. I'm gonna pretend I'm calling you on the telephone, but I can't record. Radio Shack came to rescue. So we basically hooked this to the digital phone, and then the other side to my cassette recorder, and voila, it gets converted. And then very quickly, digital recorders came into play. Radio Shack became no more, and you can no longer purchase cassette tapes. However, because I worked on a lot of government studies, this not allowed. Why? I don't know, does anyone? So we still had to use cassette tapes and recorders until I would say maybe 10 years ago. I know it sounds unlikely, however, that was true for some government surveys. That was a requirement. But nowadays, it's all digital. This is what it usually looks like with a web survey. You can see the pre-testing respondent is using his cell phone, and there is, right here is a camera. That's a portable lab. And then the image is projected to the tester's screen. Now, that's what we would like to happen. However, this equipment costs money. And with pre-testing, although we only do a few, maybe a dozen interviews, sometimes we have to go out to the field. We are almost acting as field interviewer. Now, to have a dozen of these equipment, it's just not realistic. So we became scrappy. This is what happened. Without the fancy equipment, we purchased an arm, and then hook up another phone, and then we record that way and review the video after the interview. Another way to be scrappy, hugging laptops. Essentially, turn the laptop around, and at that time, the interviewer could possibly still be sitting in another room. And then at that time, people would say, no, we can't do this remotely. It has to be in person. But of course, during the pandemic, everything was possible. This was done on Zoom. And here I'm showing 3 languages just so you can appreciate some of the challenges. In the middle is Spanish, the exact same question. The Spanish language expands. So sometimes if the question is longer, respondents will have to scroll. Here I'm showing Chinese. Chinese contracts. So it looks like a shorter question, but these are identical questions. So these are some of the challenges we have to contend with. And here is a presentation I gave for ESS because during the pandemic, a lot of people would say, Mandy, I'm using government Zoom. It's impossible for me to do A, B, and C. And I would say, yeah, you just need to push button A, B, and C in order to do what you want to do. So I ended up doing this presentation to show people how to go beyond share screen in order to engage with respondents remotely. This is a screenshot from 𝗙𝗂𝗀𝗁𝗁𝗀𝗁 platform in a book that we published last year. This is for doing unmoderated testing, meaning it's different from remote testing during COVID where a tester was still available. This one, the respondent will go online, essentially answering the tasks and probes by themselves. Now, this was last year, and things move very fast. Hopefully, we'll have a new book soon. So I've talked briefly about 2 data-based approach. The third approach would be behavior coding. And behavior coding has really become a lot more popular with CARI, computer audio recorded interviewing, since 1999. It used to be that someone has to code all of these problematic questions, but now with machine learning, there is a way to automate the coding, and which will save time. Here is a paper that just published in A4E Journal, a special issue. The authors from NORC and WestStat used machine learning, and they developed a pipeline that can be replicated. And the prior year, they also published another paper on how the idea came about. And this is an application for multilingual surveys. I want to talk briefly about eye tracking. It's helpful to see, with all the web surveys, to see what respondents focus on. Now, that image is a heat map from a long time ago. This is when I was in Saudi Arabia a few years ago. I was at their equivalent of Census Bureau. And you can see everything's in Arabic, the gaze plot here. And Arabic is from right to left. And some of these technologies are developed with English surveys in mind, right? They're developed here in United States or Europe. However, Arabic starts from the right. So there are some challenges there. There are so many interesting research possibilities. There are also ways to pretest a questionnaire without collecting any data. These are the two most popular methods, the SQP and the QAS questionnaire appraisal system is pretty easy to learn. That's why you see a lot of literature and conference presentations on using QAS, including my own. And others, expert review. That means you ask an expert such as Tom, Mario, and Melissa to provide feedback on the questionnaire. It could be paper and pencil, or they might use something like the QAS. Other methods that we don't hear as often these days, but certainly being used, is some type of classification coding scheme, and also the QUA. Statistical analysis, I'm not going to go into that, but that's definitely one way to pretest a questionnaire. So again, I just highlighted the GAZE's website for SQP. I can't end my presentation without acknowledging NCHS. They developed this program, QNotes and QBank. It's a way to analyze cognitive interview data. So not necessarily to pretest survey. However, this is such a neat tool, and it's completely free. So I just want to acknowledge their efforts. Finally, how to get in touch with me. The easiest would be just to Google.